The original series, expensive gamble, slow burn payoff. Back in the mid-60s, Star Trek was genuinely one of the most expensive shows on television. Gene Roddenberry's vision required alien makeup, elaborate sets, and optical effects that nobody else was really doing at the time. NBC was nervous from day one. They actually rejected the first pilot and made DeSilu shoot a second one before greenlighting the series. Each episode ran somewhere around $190,000 in the first season, which sounds quaint now, but was a serious chunk of change in 1966. Ratings started decent, then slid. By season 2, the show had dropped to somewhere around 52nd out of 94 programs, not exactly appointment television. NBC threatened to pull the plug, fans launched one of the most famous letter-writing campaigns in TV history, and the show got a third season. The catch? A budget cut and a Friday night time slot, which was basically a death sentence back then. The show got canceled anyway. But here's the twist. In syndication during the 70s, TOS became an absolute goldmine. By the mid-70s, it was airing in over 140 domestic markets and dozens of international ones, eventually recouping every dollar spent and then some. The flop became the foundation of a billion-dollar franchise. The animated series, cheap, cheerful, and surprisingly respected. After TOS got canceled, Paramount kept the brand alive with an animated series in 1973. Animation was the budget-friendly option. You could bring back the original cast for voice work without the expensive sets and makeup. It only lasted 2 seasons, and the animation itself was pretty limited. But it did something none of the live-action shows ever managed. It won an Emmy for Outstanding Children's Series. Not bad for the bargain bin version of Star Trek. The animated run also helped prove there was still an audience hungry for more Trek, which eventually led Paramount to develop what would become the movie franchise. The Next Generation, the show that changed everything. When TNG launched in 1987, it was the first TV series to crack $1 million per episode. By the time it wrapped in 1994, that number had climbed to around $2 million an episode. That was unheard of for television at the time. The gamble paid off spectacularly. At its peak, TNG was pulling in somewhere around 11 to 12 million homes per week, the highest viewership in franchise history. It dominated its time slots, commanded premium ad rates, and proved that high-budget sci-fi could absolutely work on TV. The show also bypassed the traditional networks entirely through first-run syndication, which meant Paramount kept a much bigger slice of the revenue pie. TNG remains the gold standard for Star Trek television, critically, commercially, and culturally. Deep Space Nine, darker, cheaper to ignore, expensive to make. DS9 launched in 1993 and immediately went in a different direction. Serialized storytelling, moral ambiguity, a stationary space station instead of a ship boldly going anywhere. Audiences were smaller than TNG from the start, dropping from around 7 million homes at launch to roughly 4 million by the end. But the budget kept climbing, especially once the Dominion War storyline kicked in and required massive space battle sequences. By the final seasons, episodes were reportedly costing somewhere in the neighborhood of $2.5 million per episode. The show stayed financially viable through strong international licensing and the fact that it was still the top-performing first-run syndicated show in its category, just with a smaller, more dedicated audience than its predecessor. Voyager, the network anchor that couldn't quite reach. Voyager premiered in 1995 as the flagship show for UPN, Paramount's new network. That relationship was both a lifeline and a ceiling. UPN only reached about 60% of the country, which meant Voyager's ratings were structurally capped compared to TNG and DS9, which had wider distribution. The pilot reportedly cost somewhere in the neighborhood of $23 million, and later seasons were running $4 to $5 million per episode. Critics and fans often described it as a less inspired version of TNG, and viewership declined steadily over its 7-year run. But here's the thing. It was UPN's top-rated show the entire time. For the network, Voyager wasn't a failure. It was the tentpole holding the whole thing up. Enterprise, the one that actually broke the franchise. If the movie franchise has Nemesis, the TV franchise has Enterprise. This is the one. The only Star Trek series that genuinely crashed and burned badly enough to take the entire franchise off the air for over a decade. Enterprise launched in 2001 with a budget of roughly $2 million per episode and a premise that should have worked. A prequel set before TOS, exploring the early days of Starfleet. Instead, viewership collapsed almost immediately, dropping by about a third between the first and second seasons. By season 4, UPN had slashed the budget to under $1 million per episode. The network only renewed it to hit the 100-episode threshold needed for syndication deals, essentially treating it as a dead show walking before it even finished. The reasons for the failure stack up pretty clearly in hindsight. Franchise fatigue was real. Star Trek had been on the air continuously for 14 years by that point, producing over 600 episodes. UPN itself was pivoting its identity toward a completely different demographic and had little interest in promoting a sci-fi prequel. DVR technology was emerging, but Nielsen wasn't counting those viewers yet, so the actual audience was probably larger than the numbers showed. The show also made some genuinely baffling creative choices. A temporal Cold War storyline that fans hated, new aliens that didn't fit established canon, and a theme song that became almost universally mocked. Enterprise was canceled in 2005, and Star Trek disappeared from television entirely. It took the Kelvin Timeline movies to keep the brand alive until the streaming era made a TV comeback viable. Discovery, the show that brought Trek back. Discovery launched in 2017 after a 12-year absence from television, and it had a lot riding on it. Not just for the franchise, but for CBS All Access, the fledgling streaming platform that needed a marquee show to convince people to subscribe. Discovery was that show. The budget reflected the stakes. Episodes were running somewhere in the $8 to $11 million range, which was a massive leap from anything the franchise had done before. To help offset those costs, CBS struck a licensing deal with Netflix for international distribution rights that reportedly covered more than the entire production budget before a single episode aired domestically. Essentially, the show was already profitable before most American fans had seen it. Discovery had a rocky relationship with its audience throughout its 5-season run. It was praised for its production values and diversity, but criticized for inconsistent storytelling and a tendency to make every season feel like the fate of the entire universe was at stake. Viewership metrics were respectable but never quite reached the heights of Strange New Worlds. It was ultimately canceled after Season 5, making it the first streaming-era Trek show to be retired, though it went out on its own terms, rather than being axed mid-story. Picard, a prestige experiment with a stunning comeback. Picard launched in 2020 as a prestige drama built around one of the most beloved characters in franchise history. The pitch was simple and compelling. What happened to Jean-Luc Picard after the events of the TNG films? For a certain generation of fans, that was an irresistible hook. The budget was in the same ballpark as Discovery, roughly $8 to $9 million per episode, and the first season leaned hard into a serialized, cinematic style that felt very different from classic Trek. Reception was mixed. The show looked gorgeous but felt slow and meandering to many viewers, and the second season was widely considered a creative misfire. Then Season 3 happened. The showrunner changed, the entire TNG cast reunited, and the season was almost universally praised as one of the best things the franchise had produced in decades. Streaming numbers jumped significantly. It was a remarkable turnaround that demonstrated just how much goodwill the legacy cast still carries. The show wrapped after 3 seasons, ending on a genuinely high note, which is more than most TV shows can say. Strange New Worlds, the franchise's current crown jewel. Strange New Worlds premiered in 2022 and almost immediately became the best-reviewed Star Trek series in years. The premise was a deliberate course correction. Instead of serialized, arc-heavy storytelling, the show returned to the episodic format that made TOS and TNG so rewatchable. Each episode largely tells its own self-contained story, with a lighter tonal touch and a cast that audiences genuinely fell in love with fast. Budget-wise, it sits in the same range as the other live-action streaming shows, somewhere between $7 and $11 million per episode depending on the season. And it has consistently delivered, with Season 3 in 2025 continuing the show's strong performance and cementing its reputation as the flagship of modern Trek. It's the show Paramount points to when it needs to defend the cost of making Star Trek, and for good reason. It keeps earning that defense. Lower Decks, small budget, big heart. Lower Decks is the franchise's most cost-efficient current offering by a significant margin. As a half-hour animated comedy, it runs somewhere around $1.5 to $3 million per episode, a fraction of the live-action costs. It can depict elaborate alien worlds and space battles that would be prohibitively expensive in live action, and it's built a genuinely devoted cult, following among longtime fans. It's not pulling in massive mainstream numbers, but it doesn't need to. The economics work at a much lower threshold. Lower Decks also did something rare. It made Star Trek genuinely funny without feeling like a parody, earning respect from even the most skeptical corners of the fan base. It was canceled after 5 seasons, which disappointed fans but made financial sense given Paramount's broader cost-cutting push. Prodigy. Quality wasn't enough. Prodigy was a higher-budget animated series co-produced with Nickelodeon, designed to bring younger audiences into the franchise. It was genuinely well-made. Critics liked it, and it did a smart job of introducing Trek concepts to kids who had never seen the franchise before. But Paramount Plus canceled it anyway, as part of a broader cost-cutting move, and it eventually landed on Netflix. The Prodigy situation is a good example of how streaming-era cancellations don't always reflect quality. Sometimes a show just doesn't fit the platform's current financial priorities, regardless of how good it actually is. A second season eventually made it to Netflix, giving the show something of a second life. But its journey was a bumpy one. Short Treks, the cautionary tale. Nobody talks about enough. Short Treks deserves its own mention as one of the more puzzling financial decisions in the franchise's history. These were standalone short episodes, roughly 10 to 15 minutes each, that aired between Discovery seasons. The total bill for the series has been estimated at somewhere around $50 million, which is a staggering amount for what amounted to experimental filler content. Some of the shorts were genuinely creative and interesting. But as a whole, the series didn't meaningfully drive subscriptions, didn't advance the main storylines in any significant way, and left most fans wondering why the money wasn't just spent on more episodes of the actual shows. It's widely considered one of the more wasteful expenditures in the franchise's modern era. Starfleet Academy? One flop or two? Starfleet Academy is the newest entry in the franchise, and its 2026 launch has sparked a debate the franchise hasn't had to have since Enterprise. Are we looking at a second flop? The show is targeting a younger, YA-skewing audience, while trying not to alienate the core fanbase that has kept the franchise alive for nearly 60 years. Budget estimates put it in the same $8 million+ per episode range as the other live-action streaming shows, which means the financial stakes are high. The early reception has been lukewarm enough that some critics are already drawing comparisons to Enterprise, pointing to similar issues around audience fit, creative direction, and whether the franchise is once again stretching itself too thin. That said, it's genuinely too early to call it a full failure. Enterprise's collapse was swift and catastrophic. Viewership dropped by a third within a single season and never recovered. Starfleet Academy hasn't hit that kind of wall yet. But the warning signs are there, and Paramount will need the show to find its footing quickly if it wants to keep the franchise's remarkable one flop in 12 series record intact. Movies versus TV, the one flop parallel. The movie franchise has produced 13 films with only one genuine financial disaster, Nemesis, which barely made back its budget and launched against Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter at the height of their cultural dominance. The TV franchise has mirrored that record almost exactly across its 12 series, though as noted, Starfleet Academy is putting some pressure on that comparison. The films that worked best weren't necessarily the biggest ones. Wrath of Khan was made for a fraction of what the motion picture cost and returned nearly 8 times its budget. That lesson, lean, character-driven storytelling over spectacle for its own sake, is one the TV franchise has sometimes forgotten, and one that feels particularly relevant right now as Paramount navigates a financially uncertain future. On the TV side, only Enterprise resulted in a total collapse of the brand. Every other series, even the ones with declining ratings or mixed reviews, succeeded in its primary mission, whether that was anchoring a network, sustaining a syndication model, or driving streaming subscriptions. That's a remarkable record for a franchise that's been running for nearly 60 years, and it's one worth protecting.